Growing up, I had a childhood friend that lived relatively close by. We were like two peas in a pod. We were both adventurous, believed in the paranormal, enjoyed astronomy, and generally just being outside. She was born in Alaska and her dad had lived there for quite a while, so they were always into camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, you name it. It was with my friend's family that I got introduced to fishing and did a lot of camping. This happened during the mid to late 90s, and we were maybe around 10 to 12 years old. It's been a while, so I can't remember exactly. One camping trip, we went to this lake in the forest that was surrounded by a meadow, and feeding the lake was a small stream leading out of the woods. Anyway, we played in the meadow and the stream all day while my friend's dad fished. The lake wasn't very big, and because it had a meadow all around it, he could keep an eye on our whereabouts while he fished. While messing around by the stream, the wooded area it was coming from gave me weird vibes. I can't explain it, I just felt really uneasy. Anyway, the day faded away into early evening, and it was time to leave and find a camping spot. My friend's dad picked up his fishing gear, and we all walked back to the truck on this long, winding path through the woods. Once in the truck, we drove into a more remote area of the forest and made our way up this steep road that was so rough and at such an incline that I was convinced that my friend's dad was going to break his truck. He had a 4, maybe 6-cylinder Toyota pickup that was about as basic as a truck could get. In fact, I'm not even sure if the truck had 4-wheel drive, but being an Alaskan outdoorsman with years of experience, I trusted him. We finally made it up to the top, which was flat and relatively open, with a big area of forest in the opposite direction from the road we drove up. We pitched our tents, got everything set up, and my friend and I decided to go explore the area. We were maybe 50 yards from the tent when we heard a big crack as a tree branch snapped in the woods behind us. We got quiet and looked in that direction, but didn't see anything. Thinking it was just a deer, we brushed it off. As we were walking, we heard it again, and whispered to one another about what it could be, but kept going. It stopped briefly, and when we were about 200 yards from our camp, we sat on a boulder looking down the steep, wooded hill, overlooking the dirt road from where we'd come. Suddenly we heard another cracking branch from behind. Whatever it was, seemed to be following us. Our imaginations going wild, we came up with everything from a serial killer stalking us in the woods, to deer, to Bigfoot. When we got back to the campsite, we told her dad what we had heard and how it seemed to be paralleling us. He kind of played it off as a black bear and secured all the food. Later on, my friend confided in me that her dad had gotten out his pistol and would be sleeping with it that night. My friend and I were sharing one tent, and he was in his own tent not far from us, so we figured everything would be okay. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to hear something, or someone, walking outside. As I lay still, listening, I could hear it quietly circling the tent. It sounded like it was walking on 2 legs, because it had a distinct rhythm in how it walked. Whatever it was, it sounded big. I could hear its weight, if that makes any sense, as it put each foot down and walked. I could even hear relatively quiet but deep, heavy breathing at times. As I lay there listening, I could hear it wandering to the other parts of the campsite and then back to our tent, almost as if it was walking in a big repetitive loop. This went on for who knows how long. It felt like an eternity. Terrified and unable to wake my friend, I lay there and listened until somehow I eventually fell asleep. The next morning I told my friend and her dad about it, but I don't know if they believed me or not. Interestingly, absolutely nothing in the camp was disturbed in any way. The ground was not very soft, and in some places was covered in grass, so there were no footprints either. This is something that I have never been able to explain, and to this day, lingers in the back of my mind whenever I can. I will always wonder what it was that walked around our tent all night. I'm an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar with and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged both my cousin and I. It was not a bear. A bear cannot move how this thing did. And it wasn't a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on two legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing that. This happened around June or July of 2007. I was around 17 years old, and a lot more cocky then, but I still was somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire at the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and the beach, and at night, you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day, the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy at all. That is, until this incident. So this happened somewhere between noon and 4 o'clock. My cousin and I were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo. He was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters in to about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail, just talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me, when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. But then I realized that the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked. At that point, it wasn't so much of a joke. I started to scan the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf-type creature as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs, crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin, "We have to go." And the next thing I know, he's sprinting. I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet. Then I turned and ran as fast as I could. Right before I turned, it looked like Wolfie was dropping onto all fours. It charged us, and it sounded like it was right on our asses, as we barreled through the brush. But for whatever reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size of this thing. Wolfie appeared to be about 7 feet tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large, clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain this away rationally. I've heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they only go a couple of steps, and they certainly can't sprint on 2 legs. Nor do wolves get that big. And black bears sort of waddle on 2 legs, so it couldn't have been either of those creatures. The closest description, as silly as it sounds, is a werewolf or a dogman. Somewhere around 2013 or 2014, I was leading my sister, who was then about 15 or 16, to a forest that I would sometimes go to with a friend. The way it was set up is there was this giant ditch or valley that had a bunch of water in the bottom. So if you fell, you could easily get injured or drown from the size of it. The ditch went in a straight line in front of the forest, and there was this little concrete dam type thing that you could walk on to get across to the forest. It's nighttime, and I've never been there at night. My sister wanted a place to smoke cigarettes, So we walked there with one of her other friends who was like 17 or 18. As we got up to the dam, we all see this 5 to 7 foot tall person type thing. And as soon as it sees us, it starts jumping towards us, about 4 feet in the air. Its movement was a little clumsy if I can remember right. When it started jumping, we all ran as quickly as we could and went back home. It was shaped like a human, but its legs looked like a goat. It almost looked like it was wearing a light gray jacket, but maybe it was fur. There was very little light, so it was hard to see well. We never told anybody about it because we were all underage. Told our parents that we were going to church, didn't tell them we were going to wander around. So we didn't want to get in trouble. I don't think there was some Olympic jumper out there doing weird stuff in the forest either. The forest has signs all around it saying to stay out, so I don't think people would really do that. One time after my sister turned 18, I texted her about it. She said that she remembers the thing being all black, so either one of us might be right. I'm not really sure what we saw. I know that there have been goatman sightings out in that area for decades, so maybe that was it. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up during the night and made eye contact with a strange humanoid creature. It was looking at me through my bedroom window. My room was ground level and my bed was facing the window. Strangely, I remember choosing to leave my curtains open that night for the first time ever. So whatever this thing was in full view. When I initially saw it, I was completely dumbfounded and couldn't believe my eyes. I shook my head no, as I was thinking that this couldn't really be happening. I pinched myself to make sure that I wasn't dreaming. Then, the creature frowned. I nodded my head yes, and the creature smiled. Again, I shook my head no, and it frowned. So I nodded, and once again, it smiled. I may have repeated this a few more times. Whatever it was seemed to be almost greenish in color and had a roundish face. Kind of like Yoda. I can't remember all of the details, but I distinctly remember telling myself that this was really happening, and not to allow myself to chalk it up later to being a dream. I kept telling myself over and over, this was real, this was not a dream. This was real. I still have no idea what that thing was. My girlfriend and I went on a 3-day backpacking trip in the Monongahela National Forest. It was day 2 of the trip, and we were coming back toward the trailhead on the return loop. We were crossing a relatively clear dell when I see a large dark brown object move from directly in front of me into a small thicket of pines off to the left. At about 30 yards, it went from 12 o'clock to 10 o'clock in my field of vision in about 1 second. Extremely quick, despite it being large and making no sound whatsoever. I could clearly make out the shape of a head, leading shoulder, and arm, running like a human would that was trying to stay low. I freeze in my tracks and look for a second, and then I explained to Susie what I had seen. She was watching her footing and hadn't seen it at all. We watched and waited for a few minutes, then for a few minutes discussed what it could have been. We decided the only thing that size and color could be a bear. I jokingly laughed it off as a Bigfoot sighting. Took a picture of the spot, marked the GPS coordinates, and we continued. As the day went on, the more I realized that it could not have been a bear. What I saw moved too fast to have been one, and I clearly saw horizontal shoulders, which meant that this thing was walking upright if hunched over, and that the only way to cross that area without making a sound would have been by stepping nimbly from stone to stone. We finished the trip without giving it a whole lot more thought. I got home tonight and I was telling this story to some friends in a group chat. I shared a picture that we had taken of the spot so I could explain how it moved. I hadn't looked at the picture before, but one friend spots a face peering out from behind a tree. And sure enough, it was in the exact spot where I saw the mystery creature run to. My grandparents, along with my grandma's sister and her husband, would go to Ontario, Canada every year for a fishing vacation. The area in Ontario is about 200 miles north of International Falls, Minnesota. During these vacations, they would go park by the garbage dump at dusk and watch the bears come out. Sadly, the local bear population had been reduced to eating garbage due to the presence of humans. Being from the south side of Chicago, it was fun and interesting for my grandparents, particularly my grandma. One evening, my grandma and my Aunt Beth were parked on the rim of the dump and sitting in Beth's car, looking down at the bears in the dump below. While my grandma sees one bear on his hind legs, he turns and makes eye contact with her. To her dismay, she realized that this was not a bear. It was Bigfoot. He looked at me with such evil in his eyes, she said. She screamed at Beth to start the car and to get out of there. Beth, hearing the tone of my grandma's voice, did what she said without asking any questions until they were a safe distance away. After they got out of there, Beth pulled over and my grandma told her what she saw. My grandma passed away in 1993. She was a wonderful person and had an open mind to what is now referred to as high strangeness. I think that's where I get my interest in it. I thought I'd share one of my Bigfoot experiences. I grew up in Oregon. As most Oregonians do, we did a lot of camping. One particular trip we were at was at our favorite site on the east side of Hills Creek Reservoir. I don't remember the date exactly, but I was probably 14 to 15 years old, around 1999. My tent was fairly close to the water, maybe 40 feet back, while my parents' tent with my younger siblings was about 200 feet farther back into the woods. I was maybe 15 feet from the fire, and our kitchen was set up about 30 feet west of me on a raised area. Everyone went to bed while I stayed up around an hour longer with my dog. We eventually went to bed. I get all cozy and my dog perks up with alert. I wasn't too worried, as I could hear frogs and crickets. And then, everything went dead silent. The frogs and crickets stopped. I could hear something coming through the woods from the direction of the lake. It sounded large. I thought maybe a bear or a deer. My dog starts growling, and I do my very best to keep her quiet. The walking sound gets to the raised area of the camp, where our kitchen is. I hear some of the stuff move around. I manage to slowly unzip part of the tent window. It's very dark, not much of a moon, and the fire was dying, but I could vaguely see something. Then, a very large figure steps down from the raised area, about a 4 to 5 foot drop, and walks directly toward my tent. My heart is pounding. The dog starts shaking and growling. Thankfully, no bark is released. The figure moves past my tent within 5 to 6 feet and makes its way back to the road and back through the woods. It took huge, broad steps, each with a deep thump. 10 minutes later, the frogs and crickets came back. I just talked to my buddy tonight on the phone for a few minutes. While we were talking, I asked him where he was. He said he was in the desert of Arizona at that exact moment. Just for the heck of it, I asked him if he had seen any weird UFOs out on those open highways driving at night. And this was his reply. No, I haven't seen anything like that. But about 3 months ago, I was out here driving and it was late at night. I was in the desert. I noticed something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was somebody wearing a raincoat. It was about 5 feet tall, shaped like a human, and was black. As I got closer to it, it spread out wings, and then went straight up into the air. It didn't flap its wings, or anything like that. Just went straight up and out of sight, very quickly. I was like, wow, no kidding. He said he thought about it, and then told me maybe it was a condor. But I was like, no man, those kinds of birds have to get a running start, and it takes them a few feet to even get off the ground. It's too bad he didn't get a better look at what he was actually seeing before it took off. As we were talking, his signal started to go in and out, so I let him go. I'm gonna try to talk to him this weekend when he's back home, see what else he's experienced. But, yeah, apparently he saw a humanoid. He's a trucker, so he gets to go all over, and I'm sure he's seen some other things as well. I can't wait to find out the rest of his story. This happened to myself, my little brother, and my cousin when I was about 14 years old. It was just around dusk. We all lived in Tampico, Tamaulipas, Mexico. We decided to go play basketball at the outside courts. It was still daylight when we first got there, and we usually start heading home at about dusk or when the court lights come on. It was only a few blocks away from our grandma's house. When the lights come on, that's usually when the bigger kids get to the court to play. But this time we were fortunate enough to have the whole court to ourselves. We were shooting hoops like normal, nothing out of the ordinary, and the lights came on. But since we had the place to ourselves and we were having so much fun, we kept playing. The game was 21, so 2 of us would stand to the side of the hoop depending on which direction the ball would go, so that it wouldn't roll into the street. And on one of these shots that my cousin made, the ball just missed the hoop and bounced behind it. I managed to grab it before leaving the court when I saw a strange creature. It was like a little person, no bigger than 2 feet. They had the face of a very old man with a fairly large nose, old ragged clothes that looked like they were handmade, and a hat that, I swear, looks like something a garden gnome would wear. You know, it was one of those pointy hats, but it wasn't straight up, it sort of hung down to the side. It was crouched down, almost like it was in hiding, and when I got too close to it, that's when it stood up, looked at me, and then ran away from me. Believe me, my first thought was not to chase it. I was scared stiff, but my cousin and little brother saw it too, and they ran. When it ran, it was headed for the other side of the court. I couldn't believe the speed of this thing. I mean, for it to be so small, it made it to the other side in mere seconds, almost the blink of an eye. It ran behind the post and was gone. I snapped out of it and I started to run home as well. And as I ran past that same post that this thing ran behind, I turned to look to see if it was there, but it was gone. When I got home, my little brother and cousin had already told the adults there what had happened. They didn't tell us we were crazy. In fact, they told us that these little creatures are called duendes. Apparently, there are different types of them too. So, I guess they're sort of a widely known creature where I live. I had never heard about them growing up, but that was my experience. You can believe me or not, but I hope you enjoyed the story either way. I've only shared this experience with a few people in the years since it happened. It was the first Tuesday of the Pennsylvania deer season, December 3rd, 2013. I've always been an avid hunter, and I would wake up very early in the morning to get into the woods before daylight. I would be in the woods at 4:30 in the morning. Having to hunt on state game lands meant beating other people into the woods to get a decent spot. When I got to the parking area at about 4:15, nobody else was there. So I walked into the woods, not using a flashlight, just walking by moonlight. I walked through a field into the tree line and started on the path to my spot. I came to the intersection in the path. One way went left and down the mountain. The other way went right. I went right because my spot was on the other side. Roughly 50 yards after making the right-hand turn, I smelled what I could only describe as hot garbage. It hit me in the face. Hot dumpster juice in the middle of August. So I stopped dead, turned on my flashlight, expecting to see piles of garbage, but nothing. No garbage, nothing dead, just that hot garbage smell. Keep in mind this is in December. It's cold out. High 20s to low 30s. So even if there was garbage, it shouldn't smell that bad. So I kinda thought nothing of it. I followed the path to my spot, which was down over the ridge from the garbage smell, roughly 40 feet down. That leads into a grass field where I would sit. I set up my seat, got settled in for about 2 minutes. And that's when the rocks started coming down the ridge. The first rock startled me, causing me to turn on my light again, scanning the field hoping to see eye reflection of a deer. But nothing was there. I sat back down. Another rock comes down the ridge. This time I stand up to go into the grass field with a flashlight and the pistol that I carry while hunting. I scanned again. Nothing. I purposefully waited in that field for about 5 minutes. Now I'm getting angry, assuming that another hunter is messing with me because I'm in their spot. I sit down again. The third rock, sounding larger than the others, comes tumbling down the ridge. I don't get up this time. Not 2 minutes after that, another rock, not tumbled, but sounded as though it was thrown off the ridge and landed in the field. Now I'm pissed. I gathered up my gear and started back up to the trail, to the ridge. I get on top of the ridge, scanning with my light the whole time. Nothing. No eyes, no other hunter. I get to the spot where I had smelled the hot garbage. Nothing, including the smell. It's just gone. Finally, it all clicked in my head. It may not have been another person. Might have been something else. I've heard stories of people's Bigfoot experiences, a lot of which remark about how bad they smell and about rocks being thrown. I thought, screw this. I all but ran out of the woods, and to top it off, no other vehicles were in the parking area when I got out of the woods. This took place in Pennsylvania State Game Lands 229, outside of Tremont, in Schuylkill County. I later came to find out that a coworker of mine had actually seen a bipedal cross in front of his car within 2 miles of the location of my experience. So maybe they're real. I don't know. But I definitely had an experience that I won't soon forget.